For many people, a career in tech sales, it's not as easy. And not everyone that jump into this career path finds success. However, their success leave clues. And on today's episode, we want to go over some of those clues, and hopefully they can help you as well as you dive into your career. Hey, everyone. Welcome to another great episode of the Sales Evangelist podcast. I'm your host, Donald C. Kelly, the Sales Evangelist. And I'm so excited for another great episode. I'm so excited to be here with you today. And on this fantastic episode, we have an amazing guest. Her name is Shirelle Francis. Shirelle Francis is, it turns out, is an individual that's right here in my backyard. We're going to talk about this. But she is I would call her like the technology evangelist, and she will probably call herself that in some ways too. We had a little conversation around that. She's been in the tech game for a minute, and specifically transitioning into the sales component was something she discovered a little bit later on. She saw how powerful it can be. Now, on today's episode, she's going to share how she found success, some of the challenges that she's had, and hopefully this can help you as you're going in your career path. Several things that I really enjoy. She emphasized the mission at the very beginning. She talks about her story, what she does, and how a mission or a purpose is so critical. We go into some of the importance of like mentorship and some of the guidance and some of the specific tactics that she's employing that has helped her, that can definitely help you as well. It is a fun episode. I know you're going to enjoy it. If this is your first time listening to our podcast or watching one of our videos, please consider subscribing. Also, take the link and share it with one other individual. You don't need to share it with everybody you know, just one other individual so that they can get the best benefit from it as well. This podcast is dedicated for two things: helping you build effective sales pipeline and converting a high percentage of that pipeline. And I hope this episode today will help you to do so. Let's dive in. Shirelle, welcome to the show.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Of course. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. And, funny thing, you and I were just talking here. I mean, we were just chatting, y'all, and we didn't realize how close we were physically. And this is the power of the internet, right? We're connected online, and then we found out we can connect closer in person.
Absolutely.
But I'm really pumped to hear your story today and to highlight and learn from you, because I think there's so many principles that we all can take away from each other, right? But before we dive into that, tell us a little bit more about you and what you do right now.
So, Shirelle Francis, I always say I am a wife and a mom first, and I have been in IT around about 20 years now, but I am the CEO and founder of iLeap Group. And what we do is make sure that those in three categories needs are met. First is education, higher education. Second are small, medium, and large enterprises. And third, speakers, associations, and the industry. We want to make sure that everyone knows that access is not an option. It is a civil right. Broadband is a pathway, and cloud and cybersecurity are essential. So when we say this, we provide assessments, sometimes penetration tests, full implementation, end-to-end IT consulting, and adoption. But our goal is to make sure that the digital divide is decimated by access to broadband and internet education throughout the world. So that is our mission.
And there's power in that. I mean, so why did you get involved in that as your mission? Because I love the mission.
Oh, thank you. It is my why. I mean, we all were impacted by the pandemic, and I think if I ask everyone will say either they became a instant homeschooling parent, proxy homeschooling, fake teacher. We all filled in the blanks, right, during the pandemic. And as the same with my husband and I, and he was impacted. He was in oil and gas. And so he was like the at-home dad. I always worked remote from home. But we were working with our then third grader, Zoe Isabel, and getting her assignments done. And in simple format, we were told we had to fax her homework.
What?
See? That's why I paused.
Who has a fax machine?
Next, that's the second comment, fax. And so at this time, we're like, fax. She was at a great charter school, Beatrice Mays in Houston. And we were in the Galleria section of Houston. So if you're familiar with the area, there's this Port Houston. So now we're figuring out how to fax, download an app, figure it out, The 7-year-old is really one telling us how to get an app downloaded. But I couldn't process why we were faxing and we were having some issues. And long story short, a lot of the educators had broadband and internet access issues. So we had to
Interesting.
fax and they had to receive some of their files manually. And so we began to see a pattern. And my niece and nephew, they were away at colleges in Atlanta and other cities, and they were coming home because even trying to be off campus during a pandemic, Wi-Fi was faulty, internet access. So they came home. So me being me, I start pulling out maps, right? I've been the program manager 10, 15 years, network architecture. That's my baby. And I'm like, there's a pattern. And I
Yeah.
start seeing this pattern. I'm like, so this is like digital redlining. Certain areas have stable internet, broadband. Certain areas don't. And after a lot of frustration, I listened to my gut. And I remember my grandfather said, he who asks the question leads the conversation.
Mm.
So I started asking some deep rooted questions, and inside company I'm at full time, started giving out tablets to organizations and doing all this work. And guess what? The tablets became paperweights. And if you remember the 80s and 90s, like our
Yep.
parents had paperweights on their desk because the students didn't have access to stable internet.
Wow.
They were pulling into parking lots of Kroger's, Piggly Wiggly's, Barnes and Nobles, really grocery stores, because those were the only things really opened high at the pandemic. And I knew then in my core, something had to change. And my daughter was impacted, my family, but the broader community. And so when I began to ask, I didn't feel a sense that everyone was aware. Not that people didn't care, but they were aware of how the impact was so broad. And that began the journey. And I said, okay, 20 years in IT, services, sales, management, but I need to figure out where to start. And I did one search with the HBCUs, historically Black colleges and
Mm-hmm.
universities. And it said that their infrastructure, 89% of the schools out of 107 had a 92% of degradation rate in infrastructure alone.
What?
So at that time, 107 schools out of 107, approximately 98% all said that they had at least 80% or more of their school grounds and infrastructure needed repairs, do-overs, or total overhaul. And so I knew then if the base foundation is shaky and faulty, then the connectivity, the stability, all of it is at question. And I'll
Yeah.
say this, imagine you have a young junior, senior on a Zoom call trying to do an interview and it cuts off. It
Yeah.
breaks up. It's faulty. They're already nervous. They're already, trying to do their best. Psychologically, it impacts. You have healthcare appointments. You have tutoring. So you have this despairing gap and it just keeps going. It's wealth. It's how we live. It's who can purchase homes. It's who can bank. It's how we think. And so when you feel uncomfortable in your education experience and learning dynamic, it really stifles you. And for me, that was enough. Enough was enough.
Wow. So right now, how so you're the organization. So do you guys what's how do you guys sell your service, or is it just like a nonprofit, or how do you generate income, so to
Income.
speak?
Yes. So this is the beauty of it. We are a full business, and so
Yep.
we are for profit and revenue. However, myself being in sales, I completed the Microsoft Women in Cloud cohort.
Hmm.
So I actually am a Microsoft partner. So end to end,
Congratulations.
I'm certified. Thank you. We offer modern workplace, so M365, network security, cybersecurity, cloud hosting. But generally, it starts in a conversation or referral. And what we always start with is an assessment. Let's assess your infrastructure before we even give an opinion, before we try to assume. Let's see the health, just as if you would go to a doctor's, right? And you have your
Hmm.
annual appointment, and we triage and then have a conversation. But what we know is the status quo. So I make outreach. I'm a part of a lot of organizations. I was at the White House Institute HBCU week, meeting with presidents, provosts, and all of those key decision makers in higher education. But we have the data that proves what the current status quo is. And to date, no one has said no. So we
Yeah.
make our revenue two ways, through the selling of services. Consulting has been very, very helpful for us in the business. And then we're also able to host. We're able to
Mm.
do cloud hosting as a Microsoft partner. And so that allows us an opportunity to revenue. And we do nonprofit work. We support other entities throughout the city and involved with a lot of scholarship and fundraising. So it's quite a journey.
Congratulations on that.
Thank
Um,
you.
and I love the, I love just love hearing missions and love hearing the idea of a mission, because this is, I mean, every sales professional should have that mission. It should be you should have something that you're passionate about that's going to help you, that's going to guide you, that gives you your North Star. However, being as a, you know, a black woman in the tech world,
Mhm.
I mean, in some cases you're kind of like a precious gem. It's not always seen
Yeah.
in tech sales, so to speak. But what are some of the challenges you faced as you were you found as a black woman in tech sales, and then, you know, how you overcame those, and then maybe we could talk about how that could, what are some things that you can inspire others who could be allies, or who can help them and help themselves in their career right now. So let's start off with that. What are some of the challenges you faced?
Thank you for even acknowledging that. So there are these stats out, right? That, I mean, literally 2% of women actually that are tech founders get past the $1 million mark. So you're up against already hearing the data. And then I personally was up against often and only. I always tell people that often and only. So I knew sometimes I would be the only, perhaps, female in the room, and black female at that, with sales in front of my title and in tech. And so what I begin to understand is, rather than to sit in it, what do I do to be empowered by that? And how do I carry the conversations that will help enable me? I have always loved sales, but by way of services, right? So my
Mhm.
truth is, I would always say, I'm not in sales. I'm a great PM, and I was known for always bringing in really great revenue in what we call change requests. So
Gotcha.
I'm a relationship manager. Like, I can do that eyes closed. But I'm like, well, hard sales. So some of the challenges I really faced out the gate was an actual mentor. Who's going to mentor me? I started looking around when I really narrowed in on cloud and cyber, of like, okay, I started looking for black women to mentor me. And I remember I had to step back and say, who's doing the work?
Hmm.
Who's met the goals? And that is what I need to look for. And I had this internal struggle. That was my truth of like, okay, there has to be a black woman or a BIPOC woman who's done this. And I had like this real conversation of, maybe it's you.
Hmm.
Maybe no one has, but keep searching. And the beauty is, in the challenge of feeling like often and only, I begin to have conversations and be introduced to others. But it also let me broaden my horizon of, okay, there are other challenges besides being a black female. The truth is, this is your why. You have to get up every day and do this. You need to be planning. You need to have systems. So training, right? So it wasn't just about my gender and ethnicity, but what's the right sales training program? Who's going to
Hmm.
deliver this correctly? And that's when I had just started zoning in, following Liz J. Simpson, right? For
Yeah.
like a year and a half before I was like, okay, this is it. So I knew I needed a mentor. I knew I needed the proper training for front of the line, what I call front of the line sales. And then the third for me was sponsorship, by way of in leadership and in funding, because there's always a gap and disparaging about capital. One, when you are ethnicity, but then in gender. It was amazing to me, fundraising and access to capital. And I did not want to go into debt. So I bootstrapped it. My husband and I bootstrapped it. But those were the three things that stood out to me, because a mentor is not the same as a sponsor. A
Mm-mm.
sponsor goes all in for you, puts their skin on the line, introduces you to their circle, can possibly bring you into rooms that you may not be able to get in on your own. when a mentor can really show you their path along the way. And I wanted those distinct areas in my life because I knew I was making this transition, but I often felt a challenge of who do I go to? But then I found communities, right? Like you got to get over who doesn't look like you may not be for you. That's not the truth.
Yeah.
It's who's aligned to your mission, who believes in what you're doing. And I have always been adamant about a value system. If the person has the right value system, that matters. And so Patty Doborowski walked me into a room with Chaitra Vodapelli and said, hey, we want you in the cohort of Women in Cloud. No one had
Love it.
previously ever brought a service. Everyone else was bringing an MVP or they had an app to go into the marketplace. Here I had a service, right? And my service is now trademarked and licensed. And so it's understanding that the relationships have to be aligned,
Hmm.
identifying a mentor, getting the proper training. I will tell anyone, do not try to wing it. I've been
Yeah.
in project management, services, sales for 20 years, and you're always learning. There's foundations, but I needed to retool as a frontline salesperson. So those were the challenges. And funding is, I think, will always be a challenge, but I was crazy enough to go into this head on when I knew there was a simmer of the R word recession coming. I knew
Hmm.
I had already been reading Ray Diallo. I had been reading and getting ready, but I also remember I bought my first home in 2009 at the fall, right, of the real estate fiasco. So you do things in the grit and you keep going and know your why.
And I love the concept there when you come back to the mentorship, because I think for many of us, even if and you also mentioned another piece that I wrote down, kind of going back to the value, um, of aligning with people of the right values, just like how, as Patty you said, who
Yes, yes.
gave you that opportunity and guided you. And I think for all of us, no matter what you're selling, no matter where you come from, no matter what background you have, like, just being able to help and to coach other people. I would not be here today if I didn't have the right people, because if it wasn't for the people that coached me and mentored me and guide me and just helped me from afar, and people who helped me close. And like you said, the idea to a sponsorship, there are people like you that brought me into certain rooms. And I think for many of us, when you have, oftentimes I found is that, and it's not because of like people are malicious or don't want to help. It's life get busy and you get so much on your plate that you don't sometimes look back and help other people behind you. But it's imperative, everyone that's listening to this podcast, no matter what your race or gender background, there's one person or two individuals that you can help, like right now. Look around and just reach out to them, because oftentimes they may be afraid of asking, or they're probably not even in that room. But identify people and be willing to help. And I think if we can do more of that, I mean, obviously continue to make our industry a little bit better place. um,
I love
but
it.
that just being a mentor and being a guide for folks.
Let me tell you why that resonates with me. I block every 2 weeks a 2 hour window on my calendar. I leave it open just to mentor, to support, to help, to call, to check in. There's teammates from Insight. I have teammates from my job from years ago at Johnson and Johnson. And then I have some young people in my church home. I leave the space there because I went through a time where I felt like I was isolated from support. And
Hmm.
sometimes in the corporate spaces with well intentions, we have programs, but sometimes the leaders just don't have the bandwidth to really reach back. And one of the things I was absolutely committed to was through my journey, making sure I reach back and I'm accessible. Because sometimes you get to the destination and you forget phases in the journey. And I'd
Hmm.
rather be available along the journey so that I can say to someone who may just be starting out, oh no, that's how I felt. Oh, I can relate. And it gives me an opportunity to learn. Like people are fascinated sometimes when they find out I sit on the board at Morris Brown College in Atlanta, and I am on the esports board and School of Business. So a
Wow.
lot of guys are like, wait, what? I'm like, I grew up in a house with 12 guys. I mean, it was impossible for me not to. But it broadens how I think of things in the business and how I interact. But I need that space for mentoring because I learn also, and right, and so it's a reciprocal relationship. But that's really really key because in sales, and I think you mentioned this even in your book, right?
Mm-hmm.
You'll have moments where it feels like dry, or you're not winning, you're not hitting the goal, and you have to know your why. And I always
Mm-hmm.
say to people, like, I'm a solution sales, period. Like
Yeah.
solution. If it's not going to help or bring about a solution, then it's probably not a path I'm going to follow. And then mentorship, that's something I want to always be able to communicate. It's not, you know, who can get there the fastest, who can sell the most, who makes the greatest revenue. It's, are you really solutioning for someone's problem? Because they will remember that. They will remember how you interacted. They will remember that you cared and that you listened. So the mentorship is major to me, and I've been blessed to have great mentors, and I will not go through this journey and not be the same and reach back.
Yeah, it's important. Looking at some of the things, what are some of the areas? You know, you mentioned some of those areas that were challenges. What are some of the things that's helped you to be successful in your tech sales experience? You mentioned a lot
I,
of like fundamentals as well, and so forth.
so one book, Greg McKeown, Essentialism. I'm an avid
Yeah.
reader, right? I mentioned earlier, 12 boys in the house. We have a big house, and then myself, I'm the oldest. So I know how to pull away. And I just still loved, I have my Audible and all that, but I like to touch, feel, and I still order my books. So reading and understanding to actually explore, examine, but then really be okay with what's not needed, right? So, what
Yeah.
has helped me in my sales career? And you mentioned this, planning. I
Yeah.
am Uber planner. I'm a project manager at heart. They say in the house, you know, I will plan everyone's life away, except for when I go on vacation. I like to just chill. I give it all up there, right? But planning has been a major part of the success because I know what it feels like when you don't plan. And the problem is if you have, quote, you know, success or have a great win and didn't plan it out, then you can't track it, right? You can't figure out how you got there. I think that's really dangerous because then you're all over the place. So for me, planning is a baseline. What has really been amazing to me is I started in the basement at Seton Hall University my freshman year, in my first work study. I don't know if kids even know what work studies are anymore. $6 an hour. Essentially, a computer was broken. I was like, okay, I'll fix it. I did not know how to fix a computer. But what I knew was my grandmother had been an IT program analyst, IBM and Frigidaire, 35 years,
What?
right? Walking history, way before me. I'm like, I can figure this out. I knew I had to get a check and I knew I needed the computer to work. And so I started tinkering around. I was like, oh, this was just somebody not paying attention. So being totally, totally resilient. It sounds cliche, but being able to recover fast. Because what landed me in the basement was there were no other work studies in the library, nothing in the office. All they had was the basement computer lab, and no one wanted it. So that it really intrigued me with all things IT. And from there, all of my internships, my jobs, I always ended up either on a computer, figuring something out. I used to work for the CEO of Harman Hammer. You know, my first assignment was fix his BlackBerry. I'm like, what?
Wow.
He's like, I heard you're good with techie stuff. And I was like, Mr. Dwight, this was literally the CEO. I was like, okay, took it, figured it out. And you know, I think we had Google then. I don't really remember, but I remember I did that or askjeeves.com, one of those, and I figured it out. And he gave it back and he was like, now organize my contacts. And it kept building. So I noticed this pattern that if I actually studied and paid attention, it would open doors for me. I didn't always have to tell what I knew, but I had to be able to execute what I knew. And sometimes we're so concerned with making sure everyone else knows what we know. Sometimes you have to demonstrate what you know. And that's what I learned in sales. And so when I came into project management formally, I knew how to really take chaos and bring it and make it calm. And so relationship building, I would tell anyone, know how to build solid relationships because you really have an opportunity to grow the pipeline. And that was the key for me. So I grew the pipeline and I talked to my architects. I talked to my engineers. I asked them, why are we doing this? What is this plan for? What is this network for? I started to take the courses and they were like, you're a PM. If I know the work, then I can inspect what I suspect and make sure we're
Amen.
all delivering correctly.
Well, I absolutely love that.
Thanks.
I mean, I'm sure again, there's so many gems here that I pulled out of this. One, the idea of mentorship. Two, for me, the idea of making sure I adopt and follow the fundamentals. Three, being willing to learn and making sure that I continue to improve on my learning because that's what's going to help. I mean, the technology is always going to improve and evolve. And if I'm going in as a solutions provider, if I'm going in to solve problems for people, I need to be ahead of that. But if there's one major takeaway you'd like for folks listening to this episode to walk away with today from your experience, what's that one major piece of advice? Oh, and having a mission, a clear mission. But if there's one major insight you want people to leave with, what's that main insight?
We are creating a world that is a future that most of us will never see the last of. So we need to make sure that we work together to make it the best environment. And I believe education is the pathway, and actual technology innovation is the bridge, period. So we have to work collaborative so that education and innovation technology are accessible to our next generation.
Absolutely love it. Thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for coming on the
Thank
show
you.
today.
Thank you
Appreciate
for
your
having
insights.
me.
Of course. If folks want to get connected with you and learn from you, what's the best way for them to go about doing so?
You can absolutely find me on LinkedIn. Shirelle Francis, Shirelle Francis, or go to my website. It's iLeap Group. So www.ileapgroup.com. So leap, like taking a jump. People always ask, how did we get there? Most of my clients were always making this big leap in their business. And so there you have iLeap Group. So thank you so much, Donald.
Love it. Well, we appreciate that. We'll put it in our show notes. Thank you again for coming on the show.
Thank you.
Hey, that was Shirelle Francis. If you haven't connected with her already, please go ahead and do so. You can find her LinkedIn information in the show notes. Tell her you heard her here on the Sales Evangelist podcast. And I'm super grateful to have you here. Speaking about grateful, also, I'm thankful for our sponsors and for the offers that they're giving us that can help you in your sales career. Seek to take advantage of them because that's what it's all about. If we can help you to thrive and succeed in your role, money in the bank. Connect with our sponsors. Tell them again that I sent you. And if you're looking to get 3 appointments per week utilizing LinkedIn without spamming, connect with a brother and I'll help you to do so. As always, we want you to build a healthy sales pipeline. We want you to convert a higher percentage of that pipeline. I want you to raise your level of thinking and go out and do big things.